Now, for one of the more hotter topics, how can a company be investment ready? Who better than an angel investor to talk on this? Let me now welcome Mr. Vinay Kainadi to talk on this wonderful topic. A serial entrepreneur, an industrialist, early stage investor, and most importantly, a visionary, Mr. Vinay completed his MBA from London Business School. His journey started with Coca-Cola Company in 2001. He is now one of the managing partners of
Being in a Morning, everyone.
currently of area of early stage startups. He is also the chairman of Smart Sparks, one of the most active angel networks in South India. He has a global presence as well as he heads LAAN, an angel network for worldwide alumni of London Business School. Apart from the venture capital scene, he has also a thriving business and the managing director and co-founder of Highland Silver Sands, a mining and rock crushing company. Currently, he is in the process of setting up a deep tech lab focused on incubating and investing in projects related to artificial intelligence with his wife. Let me now welcome you, sir, please.
Morning, everyone. So I think I'm going to switch between English and Malayalam and take it by the flow. So hope that's okay with everyone. Being in a emerging entrepreneurial ecosystem, you have very developed startup ecosystems, entrepreneurial ecosystems like Silicon Valley, Tel Aviv, London, a lot of cities across the world where the startup ecosystem is thriving. We wouldn't call Kerala one of those. So, irrespective of where the ecosystem is, most emerging ecosystems, we see a lot of small businesses assuming that they would also be able to qualify for venture capital funding. So, as an angel investor running a few investment houses and networks, we get a lot of applications from entrepreneurs who have started very promising small businesses and they expect to raise venture capital. And we spend a lot of time trying to differentiate between fundable startups and other small businesses. And in a context like this, where we are looking at promoting entrepreneurship from the grassroots, I thought it might be relevant for us to be able to differentiate between these two types of companies. So that's what I'm primarily looking at doing right now. I think you're back. So this is just a venture capital perspective. So the term startup, I think the venture capital community has kind of hijacked it. We define that startups are scalable startups, fundable startups, and all small businesses are not startups. So I start out with a disclaimer saying that this is merely from a venture capital perspective. Anybody who starts a small business can call his or her business a startup also. So I'm only talking about it from a venture capital perspective. So I don't think the whole slide is visible. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So we have seen this entrepreneurship boom across the world, and that's been happening for 40, 50 years. This is just the MBA students, 85% of them considering entrepreneurship is very different from where the world economy was probably 50 years back. That's just one of the indicators that the entrepreneurship boom manifests in. There are a lot of other factors also in terms of wealth creation, number of new companies that are starting up. Everything kind of indicates this boom in entrepreneurship. Now, what would have caused this boom? If you actually look at the key drivers of the entrepreneurship boom, I would say number one is technology. If you look at the last 3,000 years, look at a restaurant or an inn or a fish store or something like that, the last 3,000 years, not much would have changed. It would have, 3,000 years back, a guy would have bought fish, brought it to a store and sold it. And that was probably the case even 30 years back, or even 20 years back. But with technology, So with every additional year, there are a few more stores. If there are 100, there's probably one more. What's happened with technology has disrupted most of these industries. So you see these disruptions across Uber, Airbnb, the Swiggies of the world. New business models are created out of the blue. So it's no more an organic growth in the number of businesses. It's a disruption where existing businesses are totally transformed and a new set of businesses come in. So yes, technology is probably one of the biggest drivers. The next most important driver, in fact, in certain respects, probably, apologize for the order, it's not popping up the way it's supposed to, but so the next most important factor, I would say, is venture capital. So I'm going to elaborate further in detail, but the fact that venture capital is now available for anyone with a smart idea and enough experience to run that particular business is changing the entire economy. Earlier, it was mostly family businesses or second generation businessmen, conglomerates and all that, who had access to capital. So entrepreneurship was actually a stronghold for such people. But lately with venture capital, anyone who's smart enough, who has the capability and has a good idea, can actually set up a business. Capital is available. And the third reason I would say is the positioning, the aspiration. People have started parents, colleges, everyone's started looking at entrepreneurship very differently. 40 years back, it was considered very risky. Everybody wanted their children to get a job. But the fear of failure is not there as much. The heroes that people look up to are not the industrialists that they used to look at 100 years back. It's mostly entrepreneurs who came out of started risky startups. So aspirational value has changed, positioning has changed, and the lots of rags to riches stories are actually very inspirational. So social barriers are broken with venture capital. So all these differences are probably key drivers, the way I would look at it, of the entrepreneurship boom. Now, I started out with this, can all new businesses get venture capital funding? The way I look at it, or a venture capitalist looks at it, no. Venture capital funding is available only for scalable startups. Let me try explaining what so the traditional definition of a startup is any newly established business can be considered a startup. I can continue, but if the echo is going to be, perfect, it looks fine. So any new business, any newly established business could be considered a startup. That's a traditional definition, but the venture capital industry looks at it slightly differently. So the Silicon Valley definition, so venture capital industry, pretty much everything, all theory in the venture capital industry came from Stanford and Silicon Valley, because they've defined the venture capital industry. So Steve Blank is a Stanford professor, one of the most known thinkers in the venture capital space. And the way he defines is, a startup is an organization formed to search for a repeatable and scalable model. So the scalability and the repeatability is what actually differentiates a fundable startup from a regular new business. And the way Silicon Valley looks at it, all other businesses which are not necessarily repeatable and scalable are considered lifestyle businesses. And venture capital industry generally funds only scalable startups. I will get into, I'll first explain the reason why the venture capital industry funds only scalable startups. And then I will explain how some businesses can actually, which might have started as traditional businesses, can be transformed into a scalable startup such that it can get funding. So this is an example of a traditional business, equity and ownership. A new business needs 100K capital. Peter invests 90K and Mark invests 10K. We all know how profit and equity is usually shared. Peter gets 90% of profit and equity, and Mark has 10%. So that's a traditional business, how business equity and ownership is divided. Now, even traditional businesses can be funded, but funding in a traditional business works very differently. Even I have funded companies like that. My dad has funded companies like that. So that's very different. I'll show you a funding scenario in a traditional business. So this is a traditional business external funding scenario. Assuming a new business needs 100K capital, Mark wants to start it. Peter has the money, Mark does not. So Peter invests 100K and Mark doesn't invest anything. But they agree that profit and equity will be divided 50-50. This has happened very often. I'm sure many of you would be used to this. Now, business starts with a monthly profit of, let's assume, 10K. What happens? The first 10 months, Peter takes all the 10K, which means he gets the 5K that Mark is supposed to get also. And within 10 months, Peter gets back the 50K that he invested for Mark. I think the Peter became a bill there, but yeah. So, but essentially the capital that Peter invested on behalf of Mark is paid back from the profits. And then after that, profit is shared 50-50. So this is how traditional businesses can be funded. Now, look at angel investing in a scalable startup. Same story, a new business needs 100K capital. Mark has the idea and the skill. Peter has the money. So here, Peter would invest 100K as a venture capitalist or an angel investor, but Peter gets only 10%. Now, when I started angel investing, my dad and all my well-wishers used to tell me, no, you need at least 51%. Don't take anything less than that, because it's a dumb thing to do. How can you invest all the money and then take only 10%? Just didn't make sense. So, but this is how angel investing works. Now, and Mark keeps 90% of the company. Now, this would actually be it would seem dumb for a lot of people, but this is how angel investment works. And Peter here is an angel. But why would an angel do that? How would he ever make money? That's a question a lot of people have. So it's all based on valuation growth. Now, this is one of the reasons why it needs to be a scalable startup. I'll explain that. Now, just an example that I cite from my life. It's a recent example. The name of the company is Forbes. Founder named Mohammed Saleh. He created a dashboard. So, you know, these restaurants, they have multiple dashboards. Swiggy gives them one, Zomato gives them another. And when stock changes, they need to update all these dashboards. So it becomes confusing for them. So Forbes created a dashboard. And these guys actually approached us for funding a little earlier. Now, the history of the company was in 2018, in Bahrain, there was a guy named Abbas who invested 50K in the company. And in a typical angel investment deal, Abbas got 10%. So the valuation was 500K. So what was the ownership after the deal? Abbas's 10% was valued at 50K. And Salah, the founder, had 90K suddenly valued at 450K. Now that would have seemed very inappropriate for most regular investors. Now 2021, they came to me for investment, and the investment amount was 500K, what they asked for. They offered me 10% for that. By then, they had actually got good traction. A lot of restaurants who rated them really well, a lot of people, in fact, I got referred to them through a restaurant. They built the product. Earlier, it was just an idea in 2018. By 2021, they built the product. They had paying customers. Restaurants were very happy. They had a great product. So they asked for 500K, and they would offer me only 10% for it. So the expected valuation was supposed to be 5 million. Now, what would the ownership, if I had gone ahead with the deal, what would the ownership of the company have been like? I would have got 10% for 500K. That means Salah's 90% would have come down to 81, but that would still have been valued at 4.05 million. But look at Abbas. This guy just invested in the company, and in 3 years, his 9% suddenly got valued at 450K. Because after a 10% dilution to me, he still has 9% of the company, which got valued at 450K. And so Abbas gets a 9x return in 3 years. So that's what an angel investor looks at. Now I started out with the example of Mark and Peter. Now I will give you the example of a Mark and Peter that most of you would be able to relate to. So this is the story of Mark Zuckerberg and Peter Thiel. Looks like it's a little zoomed out, so you might not be able to see it. So just to give you an example, am I loud enough? Okay, I think it's fine. So Peter Thiel started in Feb 2004, and by September 2004, he receives $500,000. Mark Zuckerberg receives $500,000 from Peter Thiel, and this is where the valuation was. So imagine from Feb to September, it's hardly any time. So Facebook was a very young company. People might have told Peter Thiel he's done to invest $500,000 in an 8-month-old company to get just 10%. But look at what happened to his equity after that. So I will show you another slide. This focuses just on Peter Thiel's investment. So when he invested, the bottom you see the valuation of Peter Thiel's shares. So when he first invested, it was 5 million. The valuation, he invested 500,000. And what happens in an angel investment scenario is, with every round, the different rounds of investments that you saw in that journey, with every round, the equity, Peter Thiel's equity is going to keep coming down. But that doesn't matter because his valuation is substantially increasing. And at the end of it, in Jan 2011, his valuation was, he had already got a return of 700x as an angel investor. So this is why an angel investor invests. But as you notice here, it's a long journey, and the company needs to, so there are a lot of people who complain against the angel investment whole philosophy, saying that it's like a money chain. You keep investing and you expect other investors to come. If you look at each stage, the new investors who've come have invested at much higher valuations. So there are a lot of people who believe that this is just like a money chain. But the way people look at it, from Apple to Facebook to Microsoft to Amazon, all the companies that control the world right now started out with venture capital funding. All the people who invested have made money out of it. And they pretty much are the most valuable companies in the world. So it's been validated over several years. So now it's beyond a point where we should have such apprehensions. But the stages matter, and it needs to be incredibly scalable. It cannot be just, so I will talk about the scalability. So it needs to keep scaling over a 10 or 15 year period. Only then will it make sense for the first angel investor, because nobody is going to buy him out at the next round. He will need to stay on. Another investor will come, like we saw in Abbas's case. The value of his equity will go up, but very often he won't get an exit. He won't get cash in his hand. He'll need to keep staying on, and the company needs to keep growing. So which is why we look at where this company could be in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, and all that, and only then could we invest. So that is, now the last point I wanted to get into is basically about, can a traditional business be transformed into a scalable startup? It's not always possible, but it is possible in a lot of contexts. So yes, in short, the answer is yes. So if you look at some scalability enablers, how a regular company can end up being a scalable startup, I would say one of the first things that you should be looking at is technology. So if you can bring in tech that gives you a competitive advantage, it could be a small restaurant, but if you have some tech which makes you substantially more efficient than anyone else, then that works for you. So that becomes a scalable competitive advantage that you have. That is good enough for a venture capitalist to invest in you. So usually, very often, technology is what we look at to see whether it's infinitely scalable. Another is branding. So you look at, I use the McDonald's example very often when I talk about scalability from a conventional perspective, a non-tech perspective. So a regular store anywhere might be able to serve really good food, but the branding and a lot of other aspects about McDonald's that makes it scalable but branding makes it very important. So if you can build a good brand and the brand has value, and over a period of time, that is scalable value that you can build. So focusing on the brand can help. Another is SOPs. If you have standard operating procedures that you've gained over 15 years of working in an industry, and then you start your own startup where you put it all together, you have processes and you're substantially more efficient. Now that efficiency, when defined as standard operating procedure, I don't know whether you watched the movie The Founder, if I'm not mistaken. It's a McDonald's movie again, where you see with the first store, he was looking at how exactly the kitchen, what is the most efficient kitchen layout, and exactly how much square feet is required for this, what is the ideal distance between the counter and whatever the stocking area and all that. So these are all part of building your SOPs. You observe, you define, and then you use those SOPs as assets for scalability. So those SOPs, because otherwise if you walk in to get a franchise model very often is a scalable model, a franchisable model. But when you walk into meet a franchisee, if you don't have any SOPs, if you don't have a brand, so point 2 and point 3, then very often it's very difficult for anyone to want to be a franchisee. So SOPs are also very important. Then, of course, IP and innovation. If you have intellectual property, that very often makes all the difference. If you have valuable intellectual property in terms of a patent or whatever intellectual property that you have, and so that very often becomes a competitive advantage. And it is actually a scalable, because using the value, you can look at multiple different models where you own just the IP, and then you can look at scalable models around you where you can make your traditional business a scalable startup if you have the IP. So intellectual property and innovation is very important. Then again, focus on a USP. Now, there are a lot of, so USP is a whole topic in itself, but if you have some specific competitive advantage, if you can spin that to be a USP for you, then that becomes a scalable, repeatable advantage that you have. So focusing on USP, so USPs could be something very simple. You find out something that a customer wants, and then you just focus on it and make sure you build a backend that delivers. Not just talking about it wouldn't necessarily cut it, but if you build a backend that gives you some competitive advantage to focus on just this one USP, then that actually becomes a scalable advantage in some context. And the vision and the scope, very often we see startups which say that Calicut has so many people and we are focusing on this and we want to start this business, you will make so much of a profit. Can you give us funding? But if the business is kind of tailor-made for Calicut, it's not a scalable startup, because who else is going to invest? We invest, and then for the Abbas to make the 9x, someone else needs to come in, right? Who else is going to invest? So for it needs to be infinitely scalable, which is why the vision and the whole scope of the business needs to be huge. Only then can we invest in a small business or a startup. And so these are all elements. Very often we've seen that we get a pitch deck and from a traditional business. There are some elements in terms of data and all that they already have, but they don't realize the value of it. They don't realize how they can slightly tweak their own pitch and make it a scalable startup. So which is one of the reasons why we wanted to give you these attributes to give you an idea about how a traditional business can probably be looked at from a scalable startup perspective and tweak your business model to kind of get funding. Now, another big question is, do you really want to be a scalable startup? So this is something different investors across the world have different ideas about it. So I'm someone who not very often, but at times invests in companies which needn't necessarily be scalable startups also. In Stanford, so I've actually been in a huge debate with 90% of a class in Stanford, where they believed that no investor should invest in a regular traditional business, a lifestyle business, and it has to be a scalable startup. But my argument there, so here I know in a lot of contexts people can use the same argument against me. So my argument there at Stanford was that for a VC, we would invest, or a VC would invest in 20 different companies. And he wants just one of them to be a Swiggy or a Zomato or something. The other 19, you don't bother about it, because that one will give you all your return. But what about these 19 other founders? Now, these might be founders who, just to give you an example, you might be a founder, you might run one restaurant, let's say somewhere here. I'm just giving you a traditional business example. Might run a restaurant, you make a profit of 1.52 lakhs, and you're happy. You live a comfortable life, and you expect the profit to increase at 5% a year and all that. Suddenly a venture capitalist comes in, eats your food, loves it, thinks you should get great branding, and decides to give you 10 crores. And you suddenly hear 10 crores for 10% of my company, great, nothing like it. No, trust me, restaurant valuations do not work like that. Tomorrow anyone running a restaurant here, please don't come and ask me for 10 crores, but I'm just giving you an example. Imagine a restaurant owner in that context. He gets his offer, and he would think it's an incredible offer, and he'll go ahead and take it. The venture capitalist will say, now start 14 restaurants, let's hire 1,000 people, and yes, your costs are going to increase from a profit of 1.5 lakhs, you're going to go into a monthly loss of 40 lakhs, but that's okay, I've given you enough funding. You scale, and by the time you get to the next round, we will find a bigger venture capitalist to give you another round, bigger check, probably another 100 crores by then. And the founder will listen to all this and will get totally inspired, and he will take the money and he will go from this 1.52 lakh profit to a loss of 35 lakhs. Few months down the line, few things are not working because risk is very high, and the venture capitalist it doesn't matter to the venture capitalist. You start burning money, and then towards the end, you have only 3 months remaining. You go to the venture capitalist, you tell him, we need to raise funding, please help me. He will say, okay, I'll connect you to a few investors in a Bangalore or whatever. So they will go pitch, and what if you don't get funding in 3 months? You're dead, your company is gone. That's it. And then you don't even get that 1.5 lakhs which you were comfortable with. So that's a big problem. So I was telling them that in a Silicon Valley context, it's very different, because you run a startup, you fail, tomorrow you go out again, you pitch, you get more funding. You have social security there, so at least for your children's education and all that, to get food on the table, the government might support you. And there is a lot of the best companies in the world work there, the best employers in the world work there. So you're a good startup founder who failed, but you could still get a good job. So the whole context there is very different. But when you come to smaller emerging entrepreneurial ecosystems, the venture capital approach might not necessarily always be the best for a founder. So that's a call for each individual founder to take, which is why I asked that question out there, because there is no focus in cash flow. When I run a traditional business, obviously every single day you look at cash flow, you look at what you have, and then you spend. And then you look at trying to, so here even if you could do X and get some money, if your larger vision is more in keeping with you doing Y, the venture capitalist will ask you not to do X and do only Y. I'm giving you money to do Y. We have a lot of other people doing X. We don't want that. I've already invested in 10 other companies which are doing X, so you do Y. But Y might not give you any money and no cash flow. So these are all issues that are generally there. So cash flow focus is not there. All the profits are reinvested. You might get a salary, but no dividend and all that. All the money goes back into the business. So it's fully growth focus. That's what I meant initially. So you have a cash flow focus versus a maximum expected return focus. So you just need to keep growing. And even your staffing strategy is very different. You need only 3 people to run one restaurant, but you're looking at starting 10 different restaurants in the next 6 months. You need trained people for that. So they ask you to recruit 30 people today for this restaurant so that you can assign them to the 10 different restaurants. So immediately, your whole recruitment strategy also changes for a startup. The lifestyle impact is huge. You can't go back at 5 and 6 and all that back home and relax and, okay, you're happy with your 1.5 lakhs. I just want to make it 2.5 lakhs in the next 1 year. That isn't how it works. So your lifestyle impact on your life is huge. And the long-term strategy also. So if you're someone who wants to build a company, so that's just an image of a grandfather with a son and a grandson. So if you want to build a business for the next generation and your family, you're not going to be able to do that with venture capital funding. It's very, very difficult. It's a very different call. So you need to decide on what you want to do and then take that decision. That decision is always the founders. Yep, I guess that's it. These are some of the companies that we've invested in. So thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, the growth is phenomenal. Now, how as a VC, like, I mean, I'm asking from your perspective. Now, how are you going to ensure that this money is not diverted and this money is not misused? Like, how it will sustain that growth continuously for so many years?
So VCs, I think I'll probably explain what a term sheet is. One of the reasons why with my first investment, my dad wanted me to get at least 51% was to see to that, because I'm putting in all the money, I have control. But VCs still have control. But their control is based on a shareholders agreement or a term sheet. Term sheet is not legally valid, but a shareholders agreement is what the final document that you sign. In a shareholders agreement, there are a lot of clauses where VCs might have veto rights. There are affirmative rights that VCs have where they need to approve a lot of decisions. Information rights where a VC needs to know where the money is going pretty much on a weekly basis or a monthly basis and all that. So there are a lot of controls. So it's not just like you write a check and you forget about it. Huge amounts of controls. That depends on each different venture capitalist, but almost all venture capitalists have huge controls in place over their startups. So diversion of funds and all that is usually not very easily possible.
Is there any more questions?
Any other questions? Of course, sir.
I guess we'll wrap it up then.
Perfect.
Thank
you
you
so much. Thank you.
Thank you. So, let me just welcome Mr. Murali Narai to give a small memento.